Welcome to the Republican Professor. Today we have with us a very special guest, Dr. Stephen P. Halbrook. Thanks for being here, Steve.
Glad to be on the show again, Lucas. Thank you.
And we have guest co-hosting with us today, Mrs. Heather Allen,
Hi,
joining
everybody.
us, joining us from North Carolina.
Hi,
And she is a firearms educator.
I am. And concealed carry instructor. Woohoo.
Woohoo, awesome. The book that we're talking about today is this wonderful book called America's Rifle. The subtitle, The Case for the AR-15. And as I just put out to my community, I think it's the best Second Amendment academic book, textbook, and I'm calling it a textbook. Don't be scared of it. I mean that as a compliment. It is an academic book on the Second Amendment in print, and as far as I can tell. And I think it's one of the best constitutional law books I've ever read. And not to say I've read a lot, but I have a Ph.D. in this stuff. So I really do appreciate the work you've put into this, Steve. It's richly footnoted, and there are pictures in it, which is also wonderful. Sometimes it's good to take a look at what you're looking at, especially when you're talking about features. And so thank you for writing it.
Yeah, Lucas, thank you for having me again. And by the way, none of my previous books on the Second Amendment had illustrations, but I was sternly told you really have to have photographs and diagrams in this book because most people, or a lot of people, don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, what's a pistol grip? What's a muzzle brake? So I
Right.
got permission from Colt to use one of their diagrams. I actually took a photo from my own user's manual for the AR-15 Sporter H-bar, which is a fine target rifle. And that's the diagram that you see, the diagram showing the parts, because once again, you've got these judges making decisions and members of the public, and you know, what's a retractable or telescoping shoulder stock? What are these parts? So, okay, let's look at a picture.
Yeah, you have to. What I really appreciate about your book is, for me, it filled in a lot of the statutory stuff that I was missing. In the 20th century, there were a number of gun control bills that were passed. And so let's take some highlights. One is the 1986 bill, the firearm, forget what it was called.
Firearms Owners Protection Act.
FOPA. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And that was signed by President Reagan, right?
Correct.
So that was a mixed bag, as you said, but the notable thing about that was negative was that it was the first time in American history that mere possession of a firearm was banned, and it was banned without any nexus to any constitutional provision like the Commerce Clause. And previously, these bills, like the 1968 bill was the major bill before that, they had always been careful not to ban mere possession, but to link it to some explicitly articulated delegation of power to Congress, like the Interstate Commerce Clause, right? Or the Importations Clause.
Right.
And
And you can go back to the National Firearms Act in 1934, and that was passed under the power to tax, to raise revenue.
right.
And the way they justified registration was you could thereby prove you had paid the tax. And so those weapons were not banned. They were required to be registered, although it was a hefty registration fee, $200 at the time in 1934 in the Depression. But in 68, the major new law that was passed, the Gun Control Act Title I, everything in it was had some kind of nexus to interstate or foreign commerce. Even the restrictions on felons in possession of guns, none of that applied unless the gun had traveled in interstate commerce. So yeah, it was a it was kind of a trick. It was a superficial way to make something apparently constitutional, but at least they tried. Now, at that time, many members of Congress didn't think that the Second Amendment meant anything. It didn't apply to individuals. And if you even go up to 1986, when machine guns were banned, any machine guns that were not legally possessed at the time the law went into effect, that was the first time there was no pretense at having some relation to interstate commerce or to the power to tax. And then that same thing happened again in 1994 when Bill Clinton signed the so-called federal assault weapon ban. There was no commerce nexus there either. And in fact, the proponents argued in Congress, and I've got all this documented in the book, that the Second Amendment only applies to militias. It's a collective right of states, and there's no individual right to keep and bear arms. Well, as fate would have it, that law was only on the books for 10 years. There was a clause that would just cancel itself unless reenacted, and there were Department of Justice did studies and found it didn't have any effect on crime, so it was allowed to expire. And
Wow.
but the interesting thing is, as many ways as Congress has sought to impinge on Second Amendment rights, those are the only two instances in which they have actually banned real guns. They did ban plastic pistols in the, I think, 84, but there weren't any. So and there still aren't any. So we they all have metal barrels.
Right.
So it does indicate something to be said for our history and tradition in the 20th century and beyond.
That's issue of the delegation of powers, and that's a limitation on Congress, has totally been lost on colleges as far as I can tell. And I try to bring it back in my classes. And that's why I find this work to be so interesting, because the history and tradition up until that time, up until the 80s, the Commerce Clause appeared to mean something. It appeared to be not a blank check where you could do whatever you wanted in Congress. And that attitude, I think, is expressed in the Lopez decision, which you reference, in 1995. And as far as I can tell, you would know better than me, that was the first time the Supreme Court said you can't just keep doing whatever you want under the Commerce Clause. Is that fair to say?
Yes, the Commerce Clause really started to get expanded, and this is pretty well known under the Roosevelt administration in the 30s. And you had the wheat field case where a farmer was growing his own wheat for his own consumption, and the Supreme Court held that federal restrictions could apply under the Commerce Clause. And so it gets expanded further and further. I argued a case called Prince versus U.S. 1997, where the government tried to rely somewhat on the Commerce Clause, and that didn't go over. We won that case 5-4. Scalia wrote a wonderful opinion, but then the boundaries keep getting pushed, and so Congress banned mere possession of a firearm on a schoolyard. Now, that's a matter for state law. If states want to regulate firearms at different places, that's within their purview. But Chief Justice Rehnquist wrote that opinion, and he said that you can't just have anything and everything supposedly being under the Commerce Clause. There's no commercial nexus to anything here, where this young guy named Lopez possessed a gun on school property. There was no commerce involved. There was no interstate anything. So there was another decision after that regarding the so-called Violence Against Women's Act, where the Congress came back and pushed this local domestic affair regulation some more, and it's like the Supreme Court was giving them kind of a spanking and saying, look, we just told you can't do this. Stretching the Commerce Clause beyond all bounds. But they continue to do it. They all the things that end up getting passed, and We've got a good Supreme Court right now, though, and we've got some
Yeah.
pushback. We've got a major case coming up about the so-called Chevron rule of deference, where agencies make up powers and then they go into court and say the court has to defer to us because we're the experts. And so there's some good pushback by the court.
Well, I really appreciate the care in the book, coming at this from the angle of the limitations on Congress by the Commerce Clause, and the that comes to bear in California where I am, because California didn't even think twice about just banning mere possession, not linked up with anything regarding commerce at all, you know, to where, and this is my experience and other people's experience in California, was if you had a rifle with certain features, and even if it was already registered, because after a certain date, everybody had to, all guns were automatically registered at the point of sale if you bought it brand new. I think it was at 2014, I think. So this is pretty late in the game that California wanted you to register everything at the point of sale. But you could have had one that was registered with the features, these bad features that are called an assault weapon. And that's all explained in the book. Everybody get the book and see what that means. It's not that hard to understand. You might think, I'm not getting this because it sounds stupid. That may be proof that you are getting it. Unfortunately. But you could wake up having done nothing, having done no overt act, not let alone done something evil, but not done nothing at all, no overt act, and become a criminal. Because the way the law in California was, and you have a whole chapter on this series of California laws, was that they just say on a certain date, if you possess a rifle or magazine like this, then you become a criminal just by existing.
Started in 1989. California was the first state to pass a so-called assault weapon ban, based on features, and they've revised that over time. I filed the first lawsuit against it. Yeah, it was decided by the Ninth Circuit. They said the Second Amendment doesn't apply in California. The 14th Amendment doesn't incorporate it. And there was later Ninth Circuit cases saying the Second Amendment's a collective militia right.
Right.
So California goes on. I mean, in the meantime, we've got District of Columbia versus Heller. The Second Amendment's an individual right. Mm-hmm. The Chicago case, McDonald versus Chicago, Second Amendment applies to the states. One thing after another, and California continues to make these laws more stringent and to make it realistic about what's really going on. So they passed a law that a semi-automatic rifle with a detachable magazine in itself is not banned, but it is if it's got two or more features. Now it's only one. But my favorite one is a pistol grip that protrudes conspicuously beneath the action. And so that's just a common pistol grip to help you stabilize the rifle, to hold it to your shoulder and aim. They made up this fairy tale about it's to spray fire from the hip so you can kill as many people as quickly as possible. This is just anti-gun phraseology. But so now they've also defined what is a conspicuously protruding pistol grip. And it's one where any of your fingers, let's illustrate with my fingers, are below the action when firing. So if you're firing like that, it's okay, it's Second Amendment protected. But if any one of these fingers is below the trigger finger when firing, then you can ban it. And so it loses Second Amendment protection by depending on where your fingers are when firing it. And so every time California passes this kind of nonsense, companies make products to get in compliance with the law. And so in California, there's a device called the fin it doesn't allow you to wrap your thumb and forefinger around a pistol grip, and instead it makes your thumb be pointed up so that you're not holding it as stable. I call this the hitchhiking position, because your thumb is up like that. So instead of holding it in a stable way like that, you're having to hold the grip like that, and suddenly it's got Second Amendment protection.
Right. You have a number of very funny, and I don't know if you were trying to be funny, but that you have some really dry sentences in here that are bracing, and they're funny, but they're also sad. Like, for example, you say on the bottom of 211, only rifles that are inaccurate and hard to control are apparently protected by the Second Amendment.
Look, a federal judge ruled that the plaintiffs argued they're more accurate and they're easier to control by having these features. And the judge said, well, yeah, duh, that's why California bans them. They don't want them to be as accurate. And of course, her ruling was there's no Second Amendment protection here. And so with that logic, you should be able to like ban sights on a gun. You don't want them to be accurate because that makes them more deadly.
Does any of this make sense to you, Heather?
It does not, but coming from California, it does not surprise me, unfortunately. But I used to work.
You have a history in California?
Of course, yeah. I was there for 39 years. I worked for the California Rifle Pistol Association. We would get phone calls all the time. Am I in compliance? And we would have to email our members flow charts, like start from here is the rifle center fire, keep going. And then it pretty much always ended up to, yeah, you're a felon.
Have you
all? I've worked, by the way, I've worked very closely with CRPA for many years. Chuck Michelle is an old friend, and they've got a great legal team out there.
They do.
He's great. Yeah.
They do.
Chuck came on a couple times last year to walk us through the Bruin stuff. Heather, have you ever shot one of these fin grip rifles before?
I have not shot. I know what you're talking about, but no, I haven't actually shot one myself.
You've seen them though, right?
I did. The last time I shot an AR was in Illinois with a friend who also left California. And you know, things are bad when people in Illinois are making fun of you for your bullet button on your rifle, for your California compliant AR. So it was kind of.
And now that person needs to get out of Illinois because now they got the same stuff.
That's true. Yeah.
It does seem to be that there's just a brazen reaction against the Heller decision and the McDonald decision, and now even the Bruin decision. So how do you make sense of that?
Well, there's like 6 states that are the usual suspects. Yep. California, New Jersey, Massachusetts, New York, you know who they are. Whenever there's a pro Second Amendment decision from the Supreme Court, they do everything they can to make life harder for gun owners. And so when Heller came down, the District of Columbia people whose law had been invalidated, they went out there on the steps of the Supreme Court and said, we're really going to get revenge now. So they passed all kinds of new bans, making life much more difficult for people who just own bolt action rifles, anything. And so we litigated that in a case called Heller 2. And in that case, 2 of the 3 judges said they upheld the so-called DC assault weapon ban. But there was a third judge who wrote a dissent, and his name was Brett Kavanaugh. Little did we know that, of course, he would become a Supreme Court justice. But then you've got the Bruin case, and they've done the same thing. The court said you have to treat everybody fairly and equally. So if A gets a concealed weapon permit, then B has to get the same permit if he's got good character, if she passes whatever tests are required, things like that. You can't pick and choose and only give permits out to people who are really rich or they're celebrities or they paid the right bribes. And Heather, I know from being from California, you know, a lot of money used to go to sheriffs to get carry permits.
Wow.
Yes.
So then in reaction to that, there's massive resistance by those same states, like New York, for example. Okay, we'll give carry permits out, but we're going to make it illegal to carry a gun in most places. And so the subway, Times Square,
Right?
everywhere,
Sensitive areas.
and then you have to, if you're a shop owner, it's a felony to take a gun into somebody's shop unless they have a sign out inviting you as a gun owner, which would be the death knell for a business in New York, because you've got anti-gun people. They're forcing commercial establishments to take a political position.
Yeah. They're forcing speech.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a constitutional issue to me.
So all that's being litigated right now. There's several cases pending in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. There's a Fourth Circuit, the Maryland so-called assault weapon ban is pending. We've got litigation against the Illinois ban in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. A court in Oregon just upheld their magazine ban. I mean, the list just goes on.
Heather, why did you leave California? Did it have something to do with firearms?
How much time do we have in this podcast? You could
Let me count the ways, right?
There's a lot of reasons, and it's funny you mentioned it because I just put my name in to run for our city council here, and I say it's, yes, I am from California. Please don't hold it against me, but it's a huge reason why I'm running, because I don't want to see those failed policies, no matter how well-intentioned they may have been, follow me here to the free state of North Carolina. But definitely the gun laws, I was not feeling very easy about the growing homeless encampments with just normalizing it and having my daughter have to deal with that on a daily basis, and then not to mention how expensive it was. So those are like kind of the top reasons there.
Have you ever shot an AR-15
Oh,
before?
Yes.
What's your impression of the weapon?
It was heavy. I don't have the strongest arms, but that's why I usually shoot handguns. But I just remember thinking it was pretty heavy. I didn't think it was too much of a kick or the recoil. It was just kind of the heaviness. But I do remember feeling like it was very accurate and being able to shoot farther distances than a handgun. It was fun.
Well, if it's accurate, it must not be protected by the Second Amendment, apparently,
Right.
because
In California.
if it's easy to handle, I mean, I know that you mainly shoot pistols, Heather, because I always see you shooting pistols. But I've noticed all of them have pistol grips that protrude.
Oh yeah,
so
gotta do something about that.
How do you how do you feel about a pistol grip on a gun? Do you think it's helpful to have a pistol grip on a pistol?
They need to devise the thumb thing for the pistol grip for a pistol, where you can only, or the fin, you can only hold it like that, so that it's shaky and inaccurate.
One of the best stories I've heard with AR-15s is in Florida, a 9-month pregnant woman, her house was broken into by multiple home invaders, and they had her husband at gunpoint, and she shot and killed one, and the others fled, but she used an AR-15 and she was 9 months pregnant. So
right, there's a number of stories like that, and I've got some of them detailed in the book, but there's no way to keep track of all these. And these judges upholding the ban say things like, well, you don't need that kind of gun. It used to be, before California's ban passed in '89, the anti-gun movement used to say rifles and shotguns good, handguns bad. And then you turn the clock up to Heller. They even argued that in Heller, by the way, DC did. Rifles are good, handguns bad. And then Heller says handguns are protected. So after that, they argued the opposite. Rifles bad, handguns good.
Funny how that works.
They continue to make that argument. And they say you really don't need one of these rifles, and you don't need a magazine that holds more than 10 rounds. But Heller said that that's for the American people to choose. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And so the people have the leading say. And if the guns are in common use, that's the test the Supreme Court has adopted, and there's no long gun more in common use than the AR-15.
I'm glad you brought it to the common use test, the history of tradition test, because last year we had the attorney that won in California the Miller versus Bonta case, which was the one of the assault weapon cases. The other one, as you mentioned in the book, I think it was, you said it was just dismissed, right? It was there wasn't even a trial. And this case, the Miller case, there was a full trial, as you mentioned in the book, and all of the issues were aired out, and he used the history and tradition test before Bruin. So then Bruin now I guess is, has something to do with how it's being decided now. But this book, the whole deal of this book is taking that history and tradition test and saying, let's run with this. And where does the AR-15 come out on that? And another issue that in the history and tradition that I really appreciated about the book was the civilian marksmanship program and the narration of that whole program and how it relates to the militia. And it's a little counterintuitive, I think, for some people to think that the usefulness of the firearm as an analog to what is used in the military to train people that might need to be called up in an emergency, that's actually protected under the Second Amendment specifically. And that the civilian marksmanship program, and then there was a board. What was the name of that board again? It was a rifle board.
Yeah, the National Board for Rifle Marksmanship.
And that's still in existence.
Well, so if you look back at the founding, all able-bodied males had to be in the militia, and they had to provide their own arms. The guns were not provided by the states or the federal government. The Militia Act of 1792 had that language, and that was a federal law that reflected state law. We get up to the early 20th century, and that had never really been enforced a whole lot. And it was repealed, and the National Guard was formed. But at the same time, the encouragement to rifle practice, that was a big project of Theodore Roosevelt, by the way. He was really into the promotion of rifle marksmanship. And there's a little booklet, Why Schoolboys Should Be Taught to Shoot, and he wrote I think a preface to it, praising the kid from New York City who won the rifle marksmanship competition that year. Something that Justice Scalia used to do in high school there also, by the way. But in the teens and 20s, the Congress enacted laws to promote rifle marksmanship, and the National Rifle Association was the organization that was organizing, in conjunction with the military, the promotion of marksmanship among civilians, and also helping to train people who might go into the military. And so when World War II comes along, you had that program together, again, with NRA backing, training a lot of these young men who were going to go abroad, and they're going to be risking their lives, and they really wanted to be able to shoot to protect themselves. And the program has had its ups and downs. It's a political football, but it's still in existence. It's a private corporation now, but they get M1 Garand surplus guns from the military. You can join gun clubs and qualify. You can buy guns and ammunition. Basically, ultimately, it comes from the government, and it's been a very successful program.
And the key feature for our purposes is that the usefulness of that program is to train people in arms that would be used, they would encounter in military service, right? So that's the whole point of the program.
That's why the three main guns, there's a lot other competitions too, but the three main guns over the decades has been the M1 Garand, the M14 or civilian equivalent like the M1A from Springfield, or the AR15 semi-auto version of the M16. And those are the ones they want you to train with. And At this point, they've made the AR-15 so accurate, they don't have a disadvantage. You know, you shoot out to 600 yards, and if there's wind
Wow.
and you've got a smaller bullet, then the wind can move it around. But the AR-15s have gotten a lot more accurate, and I used to do that competition. It's quite a sport. I'll just put it that way. And it's wonderful training for young people and older people as well. And Heather, when you were at CRPA, I know that they are deeply involved in the civilian marksmanship program as well.
We had a lot of phone calls asking about that. It sounded like a great program.
Now, what I love about your book is that you clarify that although the militia oftentimes has been to include males from 18 to 44, that the right to keep and bear arms wasn't restricted to those people, right? So women, anybody could participate in this program. Is that right?
I mean, the Second Amendment refers to the right of the people to keep and bear arms. First Amendment, the right of the people peaceably to assemble. Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure from unreasonable searches and seizures. The people has one meaning, and it means all Americans who are they're all of the members of this political community called America. And you don't, the Second Amendment doesn't say that certain people the government designates has a right to keep and bear arms, or members of the militia have a right to keep and bear arms. It couldn't be clearer. And yet we had, especially after the 1968 gun law passed, you had judges starting to make rulings that this is some kind of collective right, and we're real smart. Most people aren't as smart as us, and they don't understand. But the people doesn't really mean the people. Infringe doesn't mean infringe. Arms doesn't include handguns. You know, you had one ruling after another like that, till finally in 2008, the Supreme Court cleared the air with the Heller decision.
What what keeps me up at night though, Steve, is the 5-4 thing. And I'm interested in the politics of it, just like the Lopez case and just like Prince that you won. By the way, you're so humble, because when you mentioned Prince in the book, I mean, if it was me, I'd been like, by the way, that was me. Woo!
Yeah.
You know, but you're like, yeah, this happened, you know, and you don't even mention that you're the one that won the case. But yeah, so congratulations for being so humble. But
Well, the
yeah,
book's not about me. It's about the Second
that's
Amendment.
right. That's right. But those were 5-4 decisions. And so the politics of this thing keep me up at night, because these decisions are great, but they don't just drop out of the sky out of nowhere. There is a history and tradition of getting those Supreme Court decisions, getting the people on the court, like Brett Kavanaugh, for example, who got it right in that Heller 2, just his dissent in District of Columbia versus Heller, 2011, I think it was. And
Right.
I really,
And
yeah,
I mean, the Bruin case was 6-3. So
right.
we
Thank
were in
God.
a little bit better stead there, but we
Yeah.
don't know what's going to happen. The Supreme Court has just taken a new case that'll be heard this coming term, United States versus Rahimi. And the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals invalidated the federal ban on possession of a firearm by a person who's subject to a domestic restraining order. The problem with that law is that anytime you got two people getting a divorce, they'll sign papers mutually agreeing not to attack each other, right? Why not?
Right.
And once you do that, you're a felon if you possess a gun. So in the Rahimi case, he's not a model citizen, but the Supreme Court took that case, and we're going to see what they'll do next, because the funny thing is, the so-called liberal justices, if it's a murderer or somebody who's a really bad person, they don't have any problem at all ruling in favor of that person.
Yes.
And sometimes you have the more conservative justices like Alito wanting to stick it to them. But on the Second Amendment, those liberals love these laws that incarcerate you, give you a felony conviction for nothing, for some technical violation that doesn't hurt anybody.
That's where we're at. Well, thank you for being here. I know we're at your time limit there, Steve, but I really love talking to you about this stuff. And like I said, this book is so lovely. I enjoyed every second I was reading it, and I was thinking, man, I'm going to use this in class the first chance I get. Do you have anything to add, Heather? You want to ask
You'll be happy
Steve?
to know that every single class I teach, mostly women, I let them know. I ask them, does anyone know what AR and AR-15 stands for? And I get a lot of answers, but then I tell them the right one. So they walk out knowing what exactly AR stands for. It's not assault rifle,
No.
not automatic rifles. So I feel good knowing at least they can walk out knowing what the correct term is.
Yeah, read my lips. It's Armalite.
Here we go.
Well, the book is America's Rifle, The Case for the AR-15 by Stephen P. Halbrook. It is it's academic, but it's not academic-y. It's very interesting and has a lot of helpful background on very wonderfully explained complex statutory stuff. And sometimes the nature of the material gets a little bit crazy. It's the nature of the material. It's not the author. It's the fact that the material will hurt your brain. And this is the easiest I've ever seen it explained. So I really appreciate you coming on again, Dr. Halbrook.
Well, thank you, Lucas, for having me. Heather, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I enjoyed it. I've been on the show once before, I think, and
Yeah.
I hope you two have a good continuing discussion.
Okay. Thank you. We'll talk soon.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Well, that was really refreshing. I always love when he gives us a bit of his time. So what did you think, Heather?
I think he's very interesting and so full of knowledge, and like you said, very humble.
Yes,
In
he
his
is.
book, and he doesn't mention, oh, by the way, that was my case. Like,
Right.
to break it down fairly easily. So that's good.
So I don't know if you caught it, but he mentioned it in the book. He only mentions he was the attorney if he lost. But the big cases that he won in front of the Supreme Court, he doesn't mention that he was the guy. But like, for example, the Fresno case, the Fresno Rifle and Pistol Association, I would think it was called. That was the first challenge, I think, to the in 1989 assault weapon ban in California, and he was the lead counsel on that, and they lost that case. I mean, they were just dismissed out of. I mean, it was just they weren't even heard really.
So frustrating.
Yeah. So now I know you don't have a lot of like experience with the AR-15, or you don't have like you're not gushing about it or anything like that, but does that translate into a desire to see it removed from the
No,
streets?
no, not at all. Especially after I always think about when people are trying to remove it from the streets. Like, I think about that 9-month pregnant woman in Florida whose home was broken into. It's like, so you want to remove that from a 9-month pregnant woman? Like, this was the gun of her choice. Clearly, she felt comfortable to defend her family, her husband, from multiple intruders. So, just because I choose a handgun, I think anyone else's choice, but they decide to defend their lives with.
Yeah. Well, and you post a lot of videos because I follow her on Instagram, everybody. Well, what's your Instagram handle?
Instagram is high caliber underscore NC. So I had to change it from OC from California to NC for North Carolina.
And it's high HI or high HIG?
HIGH.
Okay. So you post a lot of videos of you shooting and you look like you know what you're doing. So, but it's usually with like a pistol. So what got you interested in firearms?
That would be my husband, Tyler. He was in the Navy, and then he joined the LA County Sheriff's Department. And then I remember he went back into the Navy Reserves, and he was gone for about 3 weeks in Virginia. And I had my young daughter at home. He's kind of showing me, I'm going to be gone, so you're on your own. So I just felt so much safer having that, the knowledge of the firearm there. And then definitely working for the California Rifle Pistol Association, I learned so much, not only about Second Amendment rights, but just constitutional rights in general. And we would shoot, and then I would start having friends ask me, like, wait, where do you work? Can you teach me how to shoot? And then it was like friends of friends, like strangers. You taught so-and-so how to shoot. Can you teach me how to shoot? And then I really got involved in instruction and teaching classes on my own after that.
Yeah. Well, you're a recurring guest, and so it's great to see you again, obviously. But the wonderful thing about this book is, even if you're just a pistol person, there's so much history in here about the statutes and like the reasoning why they passed the statute and what was their concern at the time and what they were ignoring at the time. It's very interesting data, and it does apply oftentimes to pistols. So, for example, he has a chapter where he talks about the 1968 Act, which banned a lot of the importation of the so-called Saturday Night Special. Have you heard of those Saturday Night Special?
No.
Saturday Night Special is a small gun that was typically associated with crime, but like the little, the pocket pistols, basically.
Derringers.
And well, like, like the Colt made a little 25 auto. The Berettas, they made little 25 autos, 22 pistols, stuff that you could put in your pocket. Sometimes they were snub-nosed revolvers, those were called Saturday Night Specials. And as Halbrook points out, and it's wonderful that he points this out in the book, he points out that those oftentimes were cheaper guns that minorities would be able to afford. And so what it did was it priced out self-protection for minorities. That's basically what it did.
That was the start of it.
Well, for 1968 Act, that was kind of like the major crime. That was the first time in well, actually, the first ban on mere possession would have been in 1986. So it was the time before that. Things started getting really bad when there was a ban on mere possession, not linked with anything that Congress could actually do. Because Congress can't just say, in the Constitution, it can't just say you're a criminal now. Or
kind of like what the ATF is doing at the moment.
Yeah.
They're not even Congress.
That all started in my lifetime and your lifetime. It all started very recently in our history. And since the test is history and tradition, there's not a long-standing history of that, then it really should be suspicious under the Second Amendment. Well, what do you think about, maybe just share a bit about what it's like to be a firearm educator? How's that going? Because I talked to you like last year. How long ago did I talk to you on this?
It was probably about a year ago, I would say.
About a year ago. Yeah. Okay. How's that going?
It's great. Yeah. So last week I had one of my biggest classes. We held it at a clothing boutique. I think kind of a sketchy person came into the boutique, and the owner said, she called me. She's like, I'm getting everybody their concealed carry permit. So a lot of the workers there, a lot of the women who frequent the shop, they came in. It's probably the cutest concealed carry course I've ever taught, but we had about 15 women, and they all passed, and we had a great time. I started a ladies' night, so the very first Thursday of the month, we all go shoot, and it was really fun. I think it was 2 days before the Kentucky Derby. I said, all right, ladies, we're all going to shoot with our big hats, and we're going to shoot some big guns. So I brought out the shotgun and a 45, and we all had our big hats and our big guns, and it's been a lot of fun.
Now, you've shot a shotgun. Was it a 12 gauge?
It was a 12 gauge. Yeah.
Okay. And you've shot an AR-15, which is harder to shoot.
Which one is harder?
Yeah.
Probably the pump shotgun, because there's like that action, but
Yeah.
and the
Well,
AR stuff.
what about the kick?
Yeah,
And
there's
just
definitely bigger kick, I would say, with the shotgun. So, but
yeah,
I just remember thinking those ARs were so heavy.
really?
Yeah,
Wow.
need to find a lighter AR for me, or just treat it as a workout. Might get my arm reps in when I shoot the AR.
Well, I always like hearing what you have to say, Heather. You feature prominently in my feed when I come up on this stuff, and you're constantly assaulting those who would assault the Second Amendment. So I salute you.
What I try to do.
Do you have anything else you want to add?
Let's see. I'm also writing a book about shooting in all 50 states at the end of August. Maybe might actually be September 1st is when I will shoot in Alaska, and that will be my 50th state. And the book's called 50 States in My Sight. So it should be out, I would hopefully by November.
Well, as soon as it comes out,
I'll send you a copy.
I will see it on Instagram, I'm assuming, and we'll have to have you come on and talk about it.
Sounds good.
But I warn you, if you come on, it'll sell 1 million copies.
Okay.
So just be ready for that.
I will be ready for that.
All right. Thank you very much for co-hosting this with me, Heather Allen,
I feel
from North
honored,
Carolina.
you guys. Yeah. Thanks so much
Yeah,
for
thank
inviting me
you.
along with you guys.
I appreciate it. And thank you for what you do for the Second Amendment.
Thank you for everything you do for college students. You are so needed today.
I appreciate that. Thank you. All right. See you later.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.